What's up, Net Soldiers? I'm the Alliance, and welcome back to the video, guys. Today, I'm going to be checking out Ranker's list on what is actually the worst Star Wars movie. Now, this is only the movies out of the Skywalker Saga, so only episodes 1 through 9. And 5,000 people voted on the different movies they feel are better and worse, and it all comes to this list. So pretty much, I'm going to be starting from the best and working my way up to the worst. Now, I have done ranks on this videos, and I have done... Oh, you're kidding me. And my neighbor decides to mow right now, right when I'm recording. Now, with that said, I have actually done my ranks for these films and my tier list for these films. So you want to go check those out. I'll leave links to those videos in the description below. I guess we'll just begin. Remember, spoilers ahead, so if you haven't seen these films, which I guess if you haven't seen them, you probably shouldn't be watching this video anyways, but you've been warned. Now, with that said, guys, let's begin. So for our first one, this one is very obvious to me. I kind of had a feeling this was going to be here. But the least worst, I guess you could say, or the best, whatever you want to say, is Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. This one's a no-brainer. This one is majority of Star Wars fans, young, old, definitely old, but mostly young and mostly medium age. They love this film, and it makes sense. This is actually my second favorite film out of the entire franchise. It's really, really good. There are some... There's a con to it, though, that people don't like to admit, and I'm going to say it now. The whole worm sequence, as well as like what's going on with Han Solo and Leia and Chewie, it kind of... That B plot isn't as good as Luke's A plot, in my opinion. It doesn't really hold up as well, but I understand to kind of get... But I understand to kind of give Luke some time to, be the character he's supposed to be. We have to do something with the other characters and have them kind of doing their own thing, which is okay, but it is kind of fillerish for me anyways. If you guys want to check out any of these movies, I've got to mention this, but I actually have done reviews on every single one of these movies, full-scale reviews, some of the best work I've ever done in my opinion. I'll leave links to those in the description below as well. But like I mentioned, overall, I'm not surprised that Episode 5 is the best for many people. So next one we're going to be jumping into, this is Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. I had a feeling that Episode 4 is going to be right there. That makes sense for me. Like, if I were to be placing these movies, I have my favorite movie, then I have Empire Strikes Back, and then I have A New Hope. A New Hope just holds up. I mean, there are some elements that are kind of lacking, but it's just such a solid and iconic film. It's still good. And it's still better than a lot of the other movies, in my opinion. So that's why it's here. How are you going to mow? Again, you just mowed like yesterday. Does anyone else have any neighbors or like people they know who like mow every single day? Your grass does not have to be mowed every single day. I mow my grass like every other week. Okay, so my neighbor has finished mowing his lawn, so I will finish this video. So moving on, next we have Star Wars Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. Now this one is pretty obvious to me. I do think it is the weakest out of the original trilogy. When I was younger, I thought it was actually the best. But since I got a little older, more mature, I kind of understand, storylines and different points of views of characters and what happens. It is the weakest out of the original trilogy. With that said, though, it's still a good film. I understand people don't like Ewoks. I like Ewoks, but I do understand that the Ewoks does kind of feel like a whole filler into this film, and it does kind of bring it down a little bit for me. Still a good film, just not as good as Episode 4 or 5. Moving on to our sixth film, we have Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. For me, this is my favorite Star Wars film to date. I understand that there are some films that have better quality to them, like I mentioned, Episode 5 specifically. When it comes to an overall film perspective, yes, Episode 5 is the clear, better crafted, more quality put into the film. I get that. But when it comes to just the best Star Wars movie overall, it is Revenge of the Sith, in my opinion. When I think Star Wars, when someone brings up Star Wars, when I think Star Wars movie, in my head, Revenge of the Sith pops up right out the bat. So that is the best Star Wars film, in my opinion. But like I said, there are films that are better crafted, but Revenge of the Sith, still the best Star Wars movie to date. Like I said, in my opinion. Moving on to our fifth least worst, we got Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens. So for me, I think The Force Awakens is fine. I think it's very safe. I'm not really going to go into the super details onto, why it is so similar to episode 4. Everyone already knows that, but at the end of the day, it was a safe, soft reboot that really could have pushed Star Wars to the next level. I think personally, if I was in charge of episode 7, I would have introduced a newer threat instead of kind of recycling the episode 4 threat. But at the end of the day, it's still a fine film. I think it does a good job of kind of doing its own thing while also paying respect to the past, which that's what it initially planned on doing. However, it does kind of overstep and ends up not just paying homage, but also kind of copying what the past did. So while I do appreciate the film, you can't deny that it does kind of take a little bit too much from episode 4, which makes it less original, and therefore makes it worse than some of the other films on this list. Moving on to the next one, the newest film out of the saga, we have Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. So for me, the first time I saw this film, I was actually pretty blown away. I thought it did a really good job. Second time I watched it, I was like, okay, still pretty good. Not as good as when I first watched it. Might have been the Star Wars hype. And then third time I watched it, I was like, it's fine. I still think, for me, it's still my favorite film out of the sequel trilogy. I think The Force Awakens is almost right there. Like, I'd put The Rise of Skywalker here and The Force Awakens right there. The Force Awakens established a lot of things, a lot of questions, and The Last Jedi came in and kind of knocked out all those questions and retconned a lot of the stuff that was going to be established in The Force Awakens. So The Rise of Skywalker had to come in and re-retcon things, and it's a big mess. The sequel trilogy altogether, there are things about it I love, but overall, from a storytelling element, the fact that there's too many cooks in the kitchen type of thing, it was just a rough trilogy altogether. But in my opinion, I do think this is the best film out of it. I might put The Force Awakens like almost on the level, but I personally like this one more than I do The Force Awakens. But that's just how I feel. All right, moving on to our last three. So the last three we have Episode 1, Episode 2, and then Episode 8. So let us see what is going to be the worst film out of the Star Wars movies, out of these 5,000 votes. Let's check it out. So at number 3 we have Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. So for a lot of people, this is the worst Star Wars film. And I understand where people are coming from. They do complain about how it doesn't really feel like a Star Wars movie. It kind of has its own feel altogether, and it doesn't really feel like it's connected to the rest of the films. I do believe in the idea that, yes, there was another story that could have been told with The Phantom Menace. Maybe not at this time period. A lot of the elements from The Phantom Menace that are important could have been just talked about or, flashback to in Episode 2 if that was the Episode 1, and we could have focused more like on a film based in between the Clone Wars instead of doing the TV show. I like the TV show, but before the TV show was even a thing or even a concept, there was these 3 movies. So that was kind of like what we would have to kind of speculate about back in the past when there was only Episode 1, 2, and 3. You kind of had to fill in the gaps with what happened between Episode 2 and 3 before the show was actually out. So from there, I'm okay with this film. There's definitely some really cool elements. There are some rough elements. You guys already know what it is. One of the roughest elements is probably Jar Jar Binks. Here's the thing. I love Jar Jar, but he is a little rough. I think you can't really deny that. I'm not one of the people who absolutely hate Jar Jar, because I actually love Jar Jar. I love what he represents. He represents the idea to not take things too serious. That's amazing. But he is a little rough. I keep saying rough, but I think I have a pretty good reason for why. So overall, that's my thoughts on that. Of course, you got the pod race and the Duel of the Fates. The very last fight scene in Episode 1 pretty much evolved the lightsaber fight into something we've never seen before. It was amazing. So it's kind of like an Endgame situation. A lot of people don't necessarily like the film Endgame and a lot of different things that happen to it. They think the time traveling is weird. They don't necessarily like it. But the ending of the film is just so good with all the heroes coming together. This is kind of what The Phantom Menace did too. The film itself is just very bland. It's plain. It's not necessarily bad in my opinion, but it's plain. It's like a pizza that's just plain, no toppings. You're gonna eat the pizza, but you do kind of prefer there was a little more to it. And then you get to the end, and you have that fight scene. And it's just like, it almost redeems any other issue you had. You know what I mean? So it's like a plain pizza and you're like, oh, it's just plain pizza, whatever. And you get to the end of the pizza and in the crust, it's stuffed crust, bro. There's cheese in that crust. Then you're like, oh, okay, that kind of saves it. That saves this pizza, you know, and then you eat the pizza and then it's yummy. Do you like my pizza analogy? Let me know. Comments below. Now we come to our final two Star Wars films. What is the worst, Attack of the Clones or The Last Jedi? The second worst is Attack of the Clones. This was surprising. Attack of the Clones is really disliked by a lot of people. The majority of the reason for this is because Anakin is very unlikable, and the romance between him and Padme is very kind of fake. It feels like it was, you know, kind of just placed together and the pieces weren't really fitting. It's kind of like a puzzle. Like you take all the puzzle pieces and you put them together and they look like they would kind of mesh, but when you go to put them, like their pieces don't fit. You know what I mean? You're looking for pieces like this, but the pieces are like this, and it's kind of like it doesn't fit, but it's still like kind of placed together in like a weird amalgamation. So it's still there, but it doesn't really work out as well. So that's something that people really have taken offense to in this film. Plus the best scene, I don't like sand. Here's the thing. I hate that, but I love that too because it's so cringy, but it's amazing at the same time. So that's just how I feel about that, of course. But yeah, when it comes down to it, this film is the second worst Star Wars film out of 5,000 votes. So that means that the worst film out of all these films is Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi. For me, I was kind of surprised by this, but I'm also not very surprised, because here's the thing. There's a lot of cool elements with The Last Jedi. The thing about The Force Awakens is that one of the biggest things that kind of held it back was the fact that people thought it was very safe. So you come across The Last Jedi, and it completely did the exact opposite. It tried to push the envelope. And while I respect its attempt to try to make Star Wars different, at the same time, you have to respect what Star Wars is. And I feel like the director, Rian Johnson, didn't really do that. He tried to make something different without... Like I said, while I respect the idea of him trying to do something different, when it comes to Star Wars, you have to remember that Star Wars is a specific thing, and you can't just push on your own personal agendas to kind of make a story whatever you want to make it, because at the end of the day, you're just going to make it feel gross, I guess you could say. I mean, it's a beautiful film. I think out of all these movies, my personal opinion, Episode 8 probably is the best stylistically speaking. If you look at the different camera shots, the way that the movie is filmed, the colors, it's a very, very beautiful film. It's probably the most pretty film out of all these movies. But when it comes to its story, the way it wastes its characters, the way it handled Luke, in my opinion. I know some people like Luke and that's probably one of the only things that I'm actually still sour about when it comes to this film is the way Luke was portrayed. I have a whole, like I said, I have reviews on every single one of these videos. If you want to hear more specifics on why I feel a certain way about things, check out those reviews. I left links to those in the description below. But The Last Jedi itself, I agree with this list. It is the worst Star Wars movie because it isn't really a Star Wars film. I think when it comes down to if we were looking at this as a standalone film, if it wasn't Episode 8, if it was like episode spin-off, you know what I mean? Like if it was its own spin-off story with its own new characters, maybe the beginning of another trilogy that doesn't have to do with anyone else, and these are all different characters that they introduced, and it wasn't Episode 8. This movie would actually probably be regarded as really good, but it didn't do justice to what the previous movies had set up, and unfortunately it shows, and people have noticed it, and that's one of the biggest problems with this film, is that this film was kind of like another film that they just placed the characters that we know into. And I think that's the biggest mistake. I don't know. Maybe that's just my opinion. But I do agree with this part of the list. Now let me just do a quick rundown of this. So as we saw, the best film out of the 5,000 votes, the best film was Empire Strikes Back. I agree with that. I mean, personally, while I think Revenge of the Sith is a better Star Wars movie, I do understand why Empire Strikes Back would be at number one. I'm okay with A New Hope being at number 2. That's fine. It's a little slower, of a film, but considering, you know, it was the first, I'm okay with that. Return of the Jedi over Revenge of the Sith, I disagree. I do think Revenge of the Sith is a better film. The story overall is much more cohesive compared to the Return of the Jedi, which has a lot more filler in it. Revenge of the Sith has almost no filler, but you know, there's a lot of story elements they have to push in that amount of time given, so it is what it is. Revenge of the Sith at number 6, like I said, that should be at least in front of, if it's not in front of A New Hope, it has to be between A New Hope and Return of the Jedi for me, but that's how I feel. The Force Awakens, I might put The Force Awakens behind The Rise of Skywalker, but I guess I could see the argument for why it would be in front of it, so that's okay. The Rise of Skywalker had a lot of stuff it had to do. It had to kind of fix a lot of the issues placed in place by The Last Jedi, so I don't necessarily fault that film that much because there's a lot of stuff it had to fix, and still tell a cohesive story, and it didn't really do that great, but at least it tried. You can feel that it tried. So there's that. Then Phantom Menace, I would place maybe a little bit. Well, here's the thing. If you watch my reviews, like I keep mentioning, I do think I like Attack of the Clones more, looking at the film as a more changing my perspective on the whole narrative between Padme and Anakin. I mentioned that in that video. Definitely recommend it. I'm not going to go into detail because if I go into detail about that, it's going to take me 5 minutes. I don't feel like explaining all that. And then we have The Last Jedi, which is definitely the worst out of the Skywalker saga. So there you go, guys. This was 5,000 people voted. This is the definitive. Doesn't matter about your opinion. No. Doesn't even matter about my opinion. This is the definitive ranker list. What do you guys think? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Which films do you think were better than others? Let me know how you would rank the Skywalker saga in the comments below. Thanks again for watching, guys, and I'll catch you later. Peace.